There's a nice hidden lake, a short walk away from my house in Parsonsfield, Maine. I've been going fishing there for as long as I've lived here. It's hidden away from any roads or houses. It has perfect privacy, and I would always be the only one out. On the lake fishing, in fact, I would leave my kayak in the same spot by the lake whenever I wasn't used it. It was easier than lugging the thing back and forth through my house to the lake any time. I wanted to use it, I would leave it leaning up against this huge tree, 039, every time. The kayak is heavy enough to not fall over from a windstorm or anything. I also leave it covered to prevent critters from taking refuge inside. It was a warm summer's evening. I was out on the lake already for about an hour, and I'd caught a few trout already, which I'd thrown into the cooler. It was dusk at this point, the little bit of light left in the sky was disappearing behind the trees. I was going to bring it in soon, and just then I heard sounds. From the edge of the lake, I turned, and 107 saw someone standing at the edge of the water tipping a barrel of some kind over pouring its contents into the lake. It looked to me like they were polluting the lake with something. I took it upon myself to yell out, "Excuse me, what are you doing?" The person looked up at me, and he then ran into the woods with the contents of the barrels still pouring into the water. I looked more closely at the liquid being poured out into the lake, and it looked like a dark red liquid, though it was dark out, so I can't say 134 with 100% certainty. If it was red, but it was very dark, I felt a sense of unease creep up throughout my body. I decided I wanted to leave. I'm a big nature guy, though, and seeing people littering or polluting the environment makes me sick. I genuinely couldn't resist shouting something out to that person, but I didn't feel comfortable here any longer. I planned on reporting this to the Department of Environmental Protection. I paddled the kayak back to my usual spot. I took all of my gear off the kayak before pulling it out of the water. As I-207 was putting the cover over the kayak, I heard one single snap of something not far away, like the crunch of something under a person's shoe. I turned and was about to say, "Who's there?" but I decided against it. I finished covering the kayak quicker than I ever had before. I didn't even bother standing it up to lean on the tree. This time I left it on the ground. I picked up my gear and cooler and started quickly walking out of the woods and out to the road which led to my house. It was only a couple minutes of 2:36 a.m. walk, and I was back home. I kept looking over my shoulder the entire time, though, thinking someone was behind me. I put my gear in the shed real quick, then went inside. I never locked the door so quickly. I was genuinely spooked. I rinsed off the trout and put them in the fridge, planning on cooking them tomorrow. Tonight, I just heated up some leftovers as the food was in the microwave. There was a knock at my front door. The fear and dread that I was feeling the entire walk back to the house returned in an instant. And who else would be knocking on my door this late? My lights were on, my car was in the driveway. Whoever it was knew I was in here. I had all the shades closed, though, so nobody could look inside. They knocked on the door again. The microwave beeped. As the timer hit 0, I'm sure whoever was outside heard it. All the windows were cracked open. In a moment later, there was a knock now on the window, and a man's voice said through the window, "Excuse me, I think you 341 saw me at the lake earlier." I'd just like to explain myself. There was absolutely no chance I was opening the door to this person for them to stalk me. To my house told me this was a dangerous person. They repeatedly knocked on the window and kept yelling hello through it. I decided to acknowledge him now that he was getting more aggressive. I yelled, "Yo, leave, or I'll call the police." I intended to either way, but it was still a threat to get him to leave. The man responded calmly now, saying, "Sir, if you 410 could just open the front door, I'll explain everything to you." I repeated my threat, and I didn't hear his voice again at this point. I shut and locked every window in the house and turned on the AC. I also made a report to the non-emergency police number, detailing both the barrel being dumped into the lake and the man coming to my house. I also made an online report with the Department of Environmental Protection. Making these two reports honestly made me feel a little better about going to sleep that night, but thank God I'm a 4:39 light sleeper in the middle of the night, like 2 a.m. I heard a crash from downstairs. I immediately sprang out of my bed and grabbed my Glock from the closet. I heard someone's attempt at quiet footsteps coming up the creaky wooden steps. I had my Glock loaded in hand as I stood behind my dresser, right by my closet, aiming at the door. I heard very slow creeping towards my door. My bedroom door is closest to the stairs, so it was naturally the first door that they would approach. And sure Enough, I 5'10" heard the doorknob slowly press down, and then the door pushed open. I saw nothing but the man's silhouette enter the room. I flicked on the lamp next to me so he could see my gun, and I screamed, "Get on the ground now!" He raised his hands in the air and seemed for a second to be motioning for me to calm down. He had a small blade in his hand. I told him to drop it, but then he said calmly, "I'm leaving," and he turned and ran for downstairs. I yelled at him to stop, but he clearly took the chance on me being too afraid to pull. The 541 trigger, I heard him leave through the front door. I ran downstairs to lock the front door right away and then call 911 my living room. Window was shattered, glass was all over the floor. I kept my sight on that broken window until the police officer showed up. I had to explain that I already made a non-emergency report of what happened earlier in fear of waiting to act by morning. For the barrel to be gone in the darkness, I went with 2 of the officers who showed up to my house, to where I saw that man dumping the barrel into the 610 lake. But after 20 minutes of walking around looking for it, it was gone. The man must have made sure not to leave it behind. I gave my best description of the man to the police for their report. The man was a short-bearded white man with a receding hairline and glasses, wearing a black flannel shirt and black pants. After the police left, I stayed in the living room all night with my gun next to me watching TV. No way in hell was I going to sleep with a broken window and some nut job out there at dawn. My brothers came over to help me. 641 fixed the window. My brother Dale stayed at the house while my other brother and I went to Home Depot to get the window and parts. Dale stayed at the house with me for a few nights till things cooled down. My not-so-wild theory is that the barrel contained human remains, possibly dissolved in some kind of acid. Why else would that man follow me home and then break into my house to potentially murder me? Trust your gut. If something feels wrong, I knew if I opened my door to that man, something terrible might have 709 happened to me ever since. I was a little kid. All the older men in my family would take me fishing every opportunity they got. It was like some family ritual. I, being the youngest, meant that I was next in line to become an expert, like all of them claimed to be. The ones who took it the most seriously were my dad and his brother Matthew. Our houses were decked out like the ones you've probably seen on fishing shows. I won't go into detail, but if you took a step into my house, you'd instantly be able to tell. My 745 parents spend more time on the water than on the land. This is actually his story, not mine. My dad's a pretty hard guy to scare, but let me tell you, whenever he tells the story, it's like he's a different person. He doesn't like talking about it, but every so often, at a family gathering or a special occasion, one of my relatives will ask him to tell it, and he will. My dad's name is John. He was fishing with my Uncle Matthew and their close friends Rich, Jeff, and Monty. They had set out early before the sun. 8:14 had even broken the horizon, heading to a remote spot they had all agreed was prime fishing territory. This place was a couple of hours boat ride from the nearest marina, tucked away in a secluded cove-type area that few bothered to explore. It was known among them for its abundant bass, on the occasional pike. The day started like any other fishing trip, with the boat cutting smoothly through the mist rising off the water, everyone sharing stories and jokes over the hum of the engine. They anchored the boat, the first to crack open a beer. Even though it was so early in the morning, my dad tells me all the time that Monty is his wild friend, the one who tends to drink a little more than he should. They fished for hours, the only sounds being the occasional split flash of our ray hitting the water and their own laughter, and the occasional crunch of empty beer cans that they were drinking like water. As the day wore on, they had their fair share of catches, each 1/9/10 sparking a small celebration. As dusk approached, the light began to wane. A dense fog rolled in from the water. My dad describes it as the boat literally being swallowed by fog. Rich, who was the most experienced fisherman of the group, kept saying that he had never seen fog so thick. That's how unnatural it was. Jeff, the jester of the group, was almost as drunk as Monty, both of whom were seemingly unfazed by the fog that had ensnared them. It was starting to get dark. They had originally thought that they could just wait out the fog, but at 9:42 didn't seem to be going anywhere. My dad and Rich agreed that Matthew should just try to drive the boat out of the cove.